The lock was stubborn, refusing to yield even to David's practiced hands. He knelt before the weathered front door, his toolbox open beside him like a surgeon's kit. 47 years of life had etched lines around his eyes that deepened when he concentrated, like now. The brass doorknob caught the afternoon light, warm against his calloused fingertips as he worked the tumblers. "Third call this week for a jammed lock," he murmured, more to himself than to the woman standing behind him. Elena hovered nearby. Arms crossed over her faded University of Michigan sweatshirt. The dark circles under her eyes told of sleepless nights, of a woman carrying too much for too long. Her house smelled of yesterday's coffee and children's cereal. The unmistakable scent of single parenthood. We all know what it feels like to be locked out of something, a house, a relationship, a version of ourselves we once knew. We stand on the threshold, keys in hand, wondering why what once worked so perfectly now refuses to turn. "My son tried fixing it with a YouTube tutorial," Elena said with a tired laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Made it worse." David nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. The grit of metal shavings collected under his fingernails as he worked. People think locks are simple. They're not. They're intricate. Delicate, even. He felt rather than saw Elena shift her weight, the floorboards creaking beneath her. The house itself seemed to speak of isolation, mail piled on the side table. A single coffee mug in the sink visible through the kitchen doorway. Toys scattered but contained to one corner of the living room. A home maintained by one set of hands. The lock finally gave way with a satisfying click. David turned the knob, opening and closing the door with smooth precision. There. Should work fine now. Elena's shoulders relaxed slightly. The first genuine relief he'd seen cross her face. "Thank you. I was starting to feel trapped." The word hung between them, heavier than it should have been. Isn't it strange how we become experts at fixing the broken things around us? Leaky faucets, jammed locks, cracked screens, while the fractures within ourselves go untended. We call repairmen for our homes but rarely for our hearts. David packed his tools methodically, each wrench and screwdriver returning to its designated spot. His own apartment waited across town. Empty, orderly and silent. He'd fixed everything there was to fix in that place years ago. "You know," he said, closing his toolbox with a snap, "locks don't just keep people out." Elena's eyebrow raised slightly. "Sometimes," David continued, surprising himself with his own words, "we jam them ourselves. Easier than deciding who to let in." A moment of recognition passed between them. Two people who had become experts at maintaining boundaries, at keeping their worlds functioning but separate from others. Elena's fingers traced the newly repaired lock. "I haven't had anyone over for dinner in 8 months." David nodded, understanding completely. "I haven't accepted an invitation in longer." David wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a smudge of graphite across his forehead. The lock mechanism had put up more resistance than he'd anticipated. His knees ached against the hardwood floor. The silent reminder of middle age that visited him daily now. "I thought you might need this," Elena said, appearing beside him with a glass of water. The ice cubes clinked against the sides. A small symphony of hospitality. He noticed her hand trembling slightly as she offered it, water threatening to spill over the rim. Their fingers brushed during the exchange. Hers cool from the glass, his warm from the work. There's something profoundly human about offering water to someone in your home. It's one of those small gestures that transcends transaction. That says I see you as more than the service you provide. We've all been parched in ways that have nothing to do with thirst. "Thanks," David said, drinking deeply. The water tasted faintly of minerals, like it had traveled through old pipes. "Old house, 1962, Elena replied, leaning against the doorframe. "Everything needs fixing eventually." A child's drawing hung on the refrigerator behind her, stick figures of a woman and boy, no third figure in sight. David's eyes lingered there a moment too long. "It's just us," Elena said, following his gaze. "Has been for 4 years now." David nodded, returning to the lock. "My sister raised 2 on her own. Never complained, but I saw what it cost her." Elena's exhale was heavy. Like she'd been holding her breath for years. "Everyone sees the soccer games and school lunches. Nobody sees the 3M monster checks or the constant mental inventory. Is there enough milk? Are the smoke detectors working? Is that cough just a cold?" We talk about the visible work of our lives, the careers, the achievements, but rarely acknowledge the invisible labor that shapes us. The mental load of responsibility. The exhaustion of being someone's entire safety net. The parts of ourselves we sacrifice to keep others whole. David's hands stilled on the lock. My sister called it, being the entire world for someone else. Said it was beautiful and crushing at the same time. Elena slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor beside him, her knees pulled to her chest. The posture made her look younger, vulnerable in a way that felt like a confession. Last month I had the flu. 102 fever. Still had to make dinner, check homework, everything. Her voice cracked on the last word. Sometimes I just want to be allowed to break, just for a day. David set his screwdriver down. The lock could wait. My sister said the same thing. Word for word. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes with being irreplaceable. When everyone depends on your strength, where do you put your weakness? When you're someone's entire world who gets to be yours. How did she manage? Elena asked, a desperate edge to her curiosity. David met her eyes directly. She learned to ask for help. Hardest thing she ever did, she said. Harder than raising the kids. Elena's smile was small but genuine, the first real one he'd seen. Sounds about right. The final tumbler clicked into place with a satisfying sound, the mechanical equivalent of a sigh of relief. David tested the lock once more, turning the key smoothly in both directions. The brass gleamed under his touch, restored to its proper function. There, he said, a note of professional pride warming his voice. Good as new. Elena stood close enough that he could smell her shampoo, something with lavender, simple and unpretentious. Her son's backpack leaned against the wall nearby, superhero patches sewn over worn spots, a visual history of growing up. I should get your invoice settled, she said, but made no move toward her purse. Instead, her fingers twisted the silver ring she wore on her right hand. Not a wedding band, but something that looked like it might have been passed down, carrying history in its worn edges. We all recognize that moment when words hover unspoken between two people. When the air itself seems to hold its breath. It's in these pauses that our truest selves emerge, when we decide whether to retreat to safety or step into vulnerability. David gathered his tools, each one finding its familiar place in his worn leather bag. The routine gave his hands something to do while his mind wandered to his empty apartment, to the frozen dinner waiting in his freezer, to another evening of silence. Can I ask you something? Elena's voice had changed, tightened with something that sounded like courage gathering itself. David nodded, still kneeling by the door. Would a man like you? She began, then paused, swallowing hard enough that he could see the movement in her throat, ever truly date a woman like me? Someone with baggage, a child, and a broken past. The question hung between them, naked and dangerous. David's hands stilled on his toolbox. The clock on her wall ticked 5 times before either of them breathed again. How strange that we call our history baggage. As if the experiences that shaped us are merely heavy things to be carried, burdens to apologize for. As if the chapters of our lives that brought us wisdom were just excess weight someone else must decide to tolerate. Elena's cheeks flushed pink. I'm sorry, that was completely inappropriate. I don't know why my ex-wife. David interrupted softly. He used to say I was too quiet, too simple. His voice carried no bitterness, just the weathered tone of an old truth accepted. Said I didn't have enough ambition, enough complexity. He stood slowly, his knees cracking in protest. So when you ask if a man like me would date a woman like you, I wonder if you're really asking if someone with so little to offer could want someone with so much life lived. Elena's eyes widened slightly, the micro-expression revealing surprise at being truly seen. We're all experts at diminishing ourselves, at believing our particular constellation of flaws is uniquely unlovable. Meanwhile, the very things we apologize for, our complications, our histories, our children, our scars, are precisely what make us worth knowing. I've never thought of it that way, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. David closed his toolbox with a definitive click. For what it's worth, I've never understood why people think simplicity is the opposite of depth. Or why having a child would make someone less worthy of companionship rather than more. The silence that followed wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with possibility. With the quiet recognition of two people who had been apologizing for themselves for far too long. David's calloused thumb traced the edge of his toolbox, feeling each nick and scratch. A history of repairs written in damaged leather. Elena stood before him, her question still hanging in the air between them. Her eyes both hopeful and braced for disappointment. I'm not good at pretty answers. he said finally, his voice low and textured like worn denim. "But I can give you an honest one." Through the open window, the scent of approaching rain mingled with the lemon polish Elena had used on her furniture. A child's bicycle bell rang somewhere down the street. Ordinary life continuing while this moment stretched between them. There are crossroads in our lives that don't announce themselves with fanfare. Just quiet moments where we decide whether to speak our truth or retreat to safer ground. These small acts of courage often change us more than the grand gestures we rehearse in our minds. "I was married once," David said, the words coming slowly, as if excavated from somewhere deep. "Caroline. She died 8 years ago, cancer." Elena's sharp intake of breath was almost imperceptible, but he caught it, the universal sound of unexpected pain. "After she was gone, I kept fixing other people's things. Doors, windows, leaky pipes." His eyes met Elena's directly. "But I stopped fixing my own life. Just stopped." He gestured vaguely around him, encompassing the world beyond her front door. "So when you ask if a man like me would date a woman like you, with your baggage, I think maybe you're asking the wrong question. We're all carrying something. Some of us call it baggage, others call it history. But what if those very weights we apologize for are actually the tools that taught us how to endure? What if the cracks in our foundations are where the light gets in?" Elena's fingers had stopped fidgeting with her ring. She stood perfectly still, as if movement might break whatever was happening between them. "Your so-called baggage," David continued, his voice gaining confidence. "That's just another word for experience, for resilience. I've been in enough homes to know the difference between a house that's never been tested, and one that's weathered storms." A small smile tugged at the corner of Elena's mouth. Not quite blooming but present. "And a single mom's heart." David shook his head slightly in admiration. "That's the most secure fortress I've ever seen. Not because it's closed off, but because it knows exactly what it's protecting. We spend so much time trying to present ourselves as unblemished, don't we? Hiding our repairs, our maintenance, our history of breakage and mending. But what if those very repairs are what make us trustworthy? What if perfect isn't as beautiful as restored?" Elena's eyes glistened, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Most men see my son as a complication." David nodded, understanding. "Most people see widowers as a project or a tragedy. Neither one is true." He picked up his toolbox, its weight familiar in his hand. "I don't know if a man like me would date a woman like you. But I know this man would like to have dinner with this woman. Not because either of us is perfect, but because we've both done the hard work of repair." The rain started outside, gentle drops tapping against the newly secured door. A sound that felt like permission, like possibility. David held out the new set of keys, the metal catching the warm light from Elena's hallway lamp. They gleamed between them, small, ordinary objects that suddenly felt weighted with meaning. "3 copies," he said, his voice a touch rougher than before. "One for you, one for your son, and a spare." Elena reached for them, her fingers brushing against his palm as she took them. The contact lingered a half-second longer than necessary, that small extension of touch saying what neither had fully articulated. "What do I owe you?" she asked, her free hand moving toward her purse on the side table. It's strange how we reach for our wallets at pivotal moments, isn't it? How we try to reduce meaningful encounters to transactions. As if paying the bill could somehow protect us from the vulnerability of what's really happening. The possibility that something is beginning rather than concluding. David cleared his throat, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. The floorboard beneath him creaked, the house itself seeming to urge him forward. "Actually," he began, then paused, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. "I was wondering if I could stay for dinner." The words hung between them. Through the kitchen window, the evening light painted the room in shades of amber and gold, softening the edges of everything. "Not as your handyman," he added quickly, "but as a man who wants to learn the story behind this lock, behind this home." Elena's expression shifted subtly, surprise melting into something warmer, more complex. A small crease appeared between her eyebrows, not of worry but of wonder. The most courageous questions aren't asked on battlefields or in boardrooms. They're asked in ordinary doorways. On everyday evenings, when we finally find the nerve to step beyond the safety of our assigned roles and reveal ourselves as we truly are, hungry for connection, afraid of rejection, but willing to risk it anyway. "I'm not much of a cook," she admitted, a smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, Mac and cheese from a box is on tonight's menu. My son's favorite. David's shoulders relaxed, tension he hadn't realized he was carrying releasing its grip. Sounds perfect to me. From somewhere inside the house came the sound of a backpack being dropped, of sneakers squeaking against hardwood. Mom, is the door fixed? A boy's voice, hovering on the edge of adolescence, called from down the hall. Elena's eyes never left David's as she answered. Yes, honey. And we're having a guest for dinner. We talk about families as if they come in standard configurations, as if there's only one blueprint for building a home. But the truth is, families are more like those old houses that get additions over time, a room here, a doorway there, each expansion making the whole structure more interesting, more uniquely beautiful. David set his toolbox down by the door, not leaving it, but simply setting it aside. The gesture felt significant, a physical manifestation of stepping out of one role and into another. I should warn you, he said with a gentle smile. I have a terrible habit of fixing wobbly table legs and squeaky hinges during dinner conversations. Elena laughed, a real laugh this time. Unrehearsed and genuine. And I have a terrible habit of collecting broken things that just need a little care to shine again. The new keys caught the light between them. No longer just metal but a possibility, that sometimes, the doors we're most afraid to open lead exactly where we need to go.